Hey, you freaking idiot! It's right there! Read the fucking thing! It's right there! Read the fucking thing!
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, the pleasure is all ours. You had your finger on the pulse of what was going on in Fukushima as well as many other things. I'm going to turn it over to you and let you begin to tell us.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about it.
This is the worst ecological disaster in the history of mankind, and why aren't we hearing a word about this? What's going on?
When you're talking about something as large as the nuclear industry, with such a dirty, long history, very, very strict perception management techniques need to be applied because, A, there's a lot of fear associated with, mass releases. So, in this scenario, the government thinks that you're too stupid to take the information, deal with it properly, stay out of the rain, don't allow the radioactive fallout to get on you.
You freaking idiot! It's right there! Read the fucking thing! It's right there! Read the fucking thing!
Japanese authorities have detected radiation levels 124 times higher than the accepted limit in a fish caught in waters near the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant, the Asahi Daily reported Saturday. The government-affiliated Fisheries Research Agency said Friday that the Black Sea bream had 12,400 becquerels of radioactive cesium per kilogram, far above the maximum limit of 100 becquerels per kilogram allowed for foodstuffs. The fish was caught on November 17 at the mouth of the Niidogo River in Iwaki, Fukushima Prefecture, 37 kilometers 23 miles from the Fukushima plant, which was battered by a powerful March 2011 earthquake and subsequent tsunami. It was one of 37 Black Sea bream caught in and off Iwaki to study their radiation levels. The agency said it would conduct further studies to determine when the fish was contaminated with such high levels of radioactive cesium. 2 other fish also had radiation levels that exceeded Japan's food safety standards, containing 426 becquerels per kilogram and 197 becquerels per kilo, respectively. The readings of the other 34 Black Sea bream, a species that is no longer sold at fish markets in the affected region, showed levels of contamination below the accepted limit, the agency said. Black Sea bream fishing is currently restricted off the coasts of Fukushima, Miyagi and Ibaraki prefectures. After the nuclear disaster, Japan lowered its ceiling for allowable cesium in foodstuffs from 500 becquerels per kilogram to 100 becquerels per kilo, or 6 times stricter than European Union standards. In March of last year, a fish caught near the Fukushima plant had 740,000 becquerels of radioactive cesium per kilogram, the highest reading recorded since the nuclear disaster. EFE.
You friggin' idiot! It's right there! Read the fucking thing! It's right there! Read the fucking thing!
A nuclear lecturer says the low levels of radioactivity found in tuna caught near San Diego can produce a small increase in cancer risks. Daniel Hirsch, a lecturer on nuclear policy at the University of California, is concerned about the radioactive tuna caught in August last year that reportedly swam from Japan.
So the concern is that not any individual person eating one tuna is going to have a problem, but that over large numbers of people, the small increase in radiation will produce a small increase in cancer risks.
Researchers believe the fishes left Japanese waters about a month after the meltdown at the Fukushima nuclear power plant. The discovery has alarmed many people like Hirsch, but he says there is no easy solution either.
The fundamental lesson is to never let this happen again. We cannot live in a world that we're so dependent upon and continue to have events that release vast amounts of radioactivity into that environment. It comes back to us.
Most of the radiation was released over a few days in April 2011 after the incident. Unlike some other compounds, radioactive cesium does not quickly sink to the sea bottom but remains dispersed in the water. Fishes can swim right through it, ingesting it through their gills. Sophia Su, Reuters.
Right there, you friggin' idiots! It's right there! Read the fucking thing! It's right there! Read the fucking thing! There, you friggin' idiots! It's right there! Read the fucking thing! It's right there! Read the fucking thing!
Referring to is commonly mistaken.
Okay.
Now there are two different ones. I've seen 6 different models. Most of them are 3D, and maybe 3 different images that are floating around.
Right.
Now the ones that are by ASR Limited, those are legit. That was a actual model of cesium being spread across the ocean. The one you're probably referring to that shows the entire Pacific Ocean coated in a rainbow color.
Correct. That's the one. What's the legitimacy on that one?
That is a tsunami height map.
Isn't that interesting?
That is actually the wave height of the magnitude 9 earthquake that caused the meltdown.
So the visual reference that you found, is it anywhere near? Does it look like anywhere near what that incorrectly referenced image? And folks, you know what I'm talking about. You know the map I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything? Is it close to that, or no?
The reality of the situation is this, and I'm just trying to be realistic here. A, we don't know what the total number, becquerels per liter were coming out, and we don't know what the chemical composition of those, how much of it was cesium, strontium, tritium, xenon. We don't know, okay? Too many variables. So, first of all, we'll never know. Second of all, since we don't know the total numbers, and the last I heard it was like 300 million gallons per day were coming out of there. So who knows? But the bottom line is this. I want people to understand what cesium is, first of all.
Okay.
Cesium is cesium-137. It comes from the fuel rods. It is the most abundant leftover from a nuclear meltdown. It has a 30-year half-life. For those who don't know what a half-life is, radioactivity is measured in a number, and the half-life means that if the number is 100, in whatever the half-life is, say it's 30 years here, in 30 years, its power will now be 50. In another 30 years, its power will be 25, and then in another 30 years, you get the point. So it means that every 30 years, it becomes half the power it was. Typically, cesium-137 lasts 180 to 300 years.
About my lifespan.
Yeah. Well, unless we all become robots, but whatever. It is completely water soluble, meaning that it melts in water, and it's a macronutrient which mimics potassium. Now, macronutrient, what does that mean? In the ocean, it's going to be absorbed by the smallest creatures first. You know, plankton, I don't know, something's going to eat it. And it's going to get into their bodies. And then a fish is going to eat the plankton, and then a shark is going to eat the, fish, and then we eat the shark. That's called bioaccumulation. And what that means is it starts out at the smallest organisms, plants, corn, milk, meat, and as it goes up the food chain, it gets thicker and thicker and thicker. An example of this in the past is DDT. Go look it up.
Interesting.
Cesium does the same thing. So whereas there's not going to be a lot of death at first, it is deposited all over America. At least most of the left coast is coated in it. I've heard some horror stories, but I'm not gonna use speculation on there. But the bottom line is it's going to be there for a very long time. If it is truly there, and I mean, by everybody's radiation meters, and by the models that I've seen, Nilo. I've got all the links on my article. You can go look at it. It's on Climate Viewer. Click on the radiation monitor. You can see all the details there of these different models that were done, and they all point towards, the president lied to us. Sorry, Obama. There was a reason to be concerned. In the Chernobyl accident back in the 80s, they issued, warnings to stay out of the rain in Oregon. Okay? And Chernobyl was way further inland than Japan.
Right, and a lot less troublesome, or a lot less of a disaster. Is that a true statement? A lot less of a disaster than Fukushima?
I've heard it both ways at this point, but it's completely speculation. Nobody. The bottom line is this: in a perception management world, you've got a $1 trillion industry. Okay, you've got the world's largest discussion, climate change going on, and they're trying to spin nuclear fuel as green energy. And then I hear them, saying this stuff about got to have more nukes and got to drill some more. And I've seen the dirty side of these industries. That's what Climate Viewer is about. I cover the things that nobody wants to talk about, like the Bayou Corn sinkhole. Things where communities were destroyed because of industry that did not care how much it polluted the ground. If anybody's seen the Lorax, I'm generally, and I speak for the trees. And that's why I made all this. I feel like, before my daughter was born, I worshipped war. I thought it was cool. I said, America, awesome. We kick butt. And I realized afterwards, I said, that's kind of a mean attitude. Now I got this girl. I can't, be mean. And I started looking at how bad things were. And it overwhelmed me very quickly. So I made a 3D map. It's a Google Earth. I used this KML thing so that I could put dots on the map. And I just started putting dots where I found, really bad pollution stories. Like, wow, their whole city is destroyed as a result of this one corporation. It's amazing. And then I found out about the EPA Superfund sites. Turns out they're everywhere. There are these toxic holes all around America. And then you find out about, like, the Simi Valley nuclear, the Rocketdyne Systems had an illegal nuclear power plant leaking everywhere. It's a Superfund site now. The Hanford nuclear site, it's leaking today. It's leaking right now. It was just announced about an hour ago. Go look it up. And there's an emergency over there. So a couple hours prior to the show, there was an emergency at the Omaha plant. So, they're really high numbers of gamma radiation. The bottom line is this. I live in South Carolina. I'm near the Savannah River nuclear site. There's really no protection whatsoever in America, and that's what concerns me. They have these monitors. As clearly shown in Hattrick Penry's documents, they can turn them off and on whenever they want because, God forbid, they go off and tell the truth. What would you people do? You're stupid. You're not to be trusted. You might riot. Oh my God, people might go and, steal a bunch of, rebreathers out of a hardware store and riot everywhere. So they think that you're too stupid to deal with it yourself. I think Patrick Henry would disagree. That's where we are. We're in a society where everybody thinks that, the government's going to save them when their time is down. There's no personal responsibility. The families teach nothing. Religion is mocked. It's a real sad state where we really don't have anything to fall back on. And unless people start to see, and I go back to slave speak and perception management, unless people start to see that in almost every case where human society goes to make progress, there are going to be those who are in power who do not want that change. The nuclear industry is definitely that. It's a dirty, dirty industry. The pollution that it creates is going to be with us for thousands and thousands of years. When these accidents occur, the places are uninhabitable forever. Okay. Now, a thousand years from now, they may be able to come up with some technology to change that, but that ain't today.
Right there, you friggin' idiots! It's right there! Read the fucking thing! It's right there! Read the fucking thing! Right there, you friggin' idiots! It's right there! Read the fucking thing! It's right there! Read the fucking thing!
Today I'm going to be looking at the new movie,
The Crippled Fukushima Daiichi Plant.
a space survival thriller so immersive and visually stunning it has driven everyone who's watched it violently mad, including myself.
More radioactive water has been found leaking at the crippled Fukushima Daiichi plant. Tokyo Electric Power Company officials say they failed to correctly estimate how much water a line of tanks on a slope could hold.
I have totally lost my mind and, even now, am completely disconnected from reality.
We have to confess that another leak has happened. We are very sorry for this.
About 430 liters of highly radioactive wastewater leaked from the top of a tank on Wednesday. The water was measured as having 200,000 becquerels of beta-ray emitting radioactive materials per liter. The government limit for releasing such water into the ocean is 30 becquerels per liter. TEPCO officials say the water likely drained into the sea about 200 meters away. The tank is situated on a slope and is tilted. Usually this angle is taken into consideration when calculating how much water it can hold. But TEPCO officials say too much water was added this time and the wastewater overflowed. The tank is the lowest of a bank of 5 along a slope connected with pipes. The water level is higher in those closer to the ocean, but only the one at the highest position was equipped with a water gauge. Workers believe that if they kept the water level in the tank at 98% or 50 centimeters from the top, no water would spill, even from the lowest tank, but they miscalculated. TEPCO faces an increasing workload as the firm must not only build more tanks, but also cope with an increase in contaminated rain and groundwater, as well as chronic leaks.
At one point in the movie, I imagined myself choking my neighbor's dog to death. Folks, I am currently a threat to myself and to those around me. I should be locked up in a mental institution and cared for by top mental health professionals.
People in Fukushima still have doubts. Government leaders there have decided to do their own test on ocean water near the plant. Officials held an emergency meeting to discuss the problem. They decided to launch an inspection as early as Thursday. They'll test water near a drain that they think may be carrying radioactive water. TEPCO's president recently vowed to make containing wastewater his highest priority. But Fukushima's governor, Yuhei Sato, said he's skeptical, and he criticized TEPCO's handling of the leaks. Fukushima officials say they are summoning TEPCO. They are demanding the utility quickly act to keep more contaminated water from seeping from the plant.
Now, the operator of 2 nuclear plants in central Japan may have to wait a little longer before it can fire up some of its idled reactors. Nuclear regulators have asked for additional surveys to make sure the facilities can withstand earthquakes because they sit near active faults. Officials with Kansai Electric Power Company want to resume operations at the Oi and Takahama nuclear plants. They met with members of the Nuclear Regulation Authority to talk about the 3 active faults that run near the facilities, and they repeated their claim that the faults would not shift simultaneously. They came to that conclusion after analyzing sonar surveys of regional topography, but experts who were asked to attend the meeting said the interpretation is only convenient for the utility. A senior member of the regulator said there is no definitive proof that the faults will not shift at the same time. Kunihiko Shimazaki instructed Kansai Electric to conduct additional surveys.
Speaking with Arnie Gunderson, who's with Fairwinds Energy Education, radioactivity is already leaking into the Pacific and has been for quite some time, and there's indicators that it has gotten as far as the west coast. Is that so, of the United States?
Yeah, well, actually, it's 5 months after the accident. Tuna showed up on the west coast that were contaminated from Fukushima, and what they did was they ingested the cesium near Japan and then just swam for 5 months over to the west coast of the U.S. and still had contamination in them. But now we're seeing the ocean itself contaminated. We're seeing a plume or a wedge of radiation. It's about, 9 months away from the Pacific coast, and it contains about 10 times more cesium than what was in the ocean during the old bomb days, during bomb testing days. So it's the measurable slug of cesium now is contaminating the Pacific Ocean. Yeah, the Pacific Ocean is a big place, and to think about it, we've contaminated the Pacific Ocean.
Wow. Arnie, I want to ask you a question in this context. What's possibly going to happen in the future with this situation, and what's probably going to happen? The possible and the probable. I guess it's the worst case scenario and maybe, or put another way, the worst case and the best case scenario. What's the worst case scenario we can expect? And then let's talk about the best.
Well, the worst case is if Tokyo Electric continues to do what they're doing. They're not an engineering company; they're an operating company, and so we've got the wrong skill set on this site. We really need to replace Tokyo Electric. But my fear is it's an aftershock. After the Sumatra earthquake back in 2004. That was a 9, and about 2 or 3 years afterward, there was a Richter 8.6. This was a 9.3, and we haven't had the aftershock yet. None of these buildings, that had the explosions, none of these reactor containments, nor the tank farm can withstand it. So, to my mind, the worst case is a seismic event. And I've been saying, I don't care what God you pray to, but let's pray that there's no earthquake. And that's key number one. The other thing is Tokyo Electric is responsible now to try to empty the fuel pool at Fukushima Unit 4, which is the most dangerous one. It has the most fuel in the fuel pool. and that's the one that has no roof over the nuclear fuel. The problem there is that the fuel pool has been distorted, almost like a pack of cigarettes getting crushed. So it's really hard to pull a cigarette out of a cigarette pack when the pack is crushed. Well, this nuclear fuel is in a fuel pool, and if they pull too hard, they likely will snap a bundle, and that will release radioactive material into the building. And Tokyo Electric has already said that they're just going to pump that right out into the air. So we're not done with radioactive releases. So that's the worst case. Best case is we get rid of Tokyo Electric, replace them with a firm that knows what they're doing. And there are 6 or 7 in the world who can do this job, unfortunately. The other piece of it, though, is money. It always boils down to money. That Japan has to admit to its own people that they're on the hook here for $500 billion, U.S. dollars.
Wow.
And right now, the Abe regime doesn't want that to happen, because if people realize the cost, they're going to say, whoa, we don't want any more nuclear plants starting back up. And the last piece is citizen oversight. We're constantly frustrated. We have scientists contacting us, doctors contacting us, telling us that their patients are suffering from radiation-induced injuries, or they're noticing deformities in animals and plants. But yet the Japanese government is trying to put the heat on them to prevent those studies from moving forward. So with citizen oversight, we've got to go around this government infrastructure. So a new contractor with some citizen oversight and the admission that this is a really costly problem, I think they can move forward. But if they don't do those 3 things, we're going to be mired in this mess for years.
What then is the best we can expect in these circumstances, Arnie Gundersen, talking about Fukushima?
Well, at least for another 2 years, the plant is going to be leaking into the Pacific. So there's nothing they can do to prevent the groundwater from moving into the Pacific for at least another 2 years. 2 years out, the ice wall may work, it may not. So we're going to see not just the contaminations that's there, but new contamination leaking into the Pacific. That's the best case if that's all that happens. And of course, we all have to pray that there's no earthquake, because at least 2 of the structures, Fukushima 4 and Fukushima 3, are really compromised when it comes to a potential for earthquake damage.
In the, I think it's the E-News, the website, they talk about 100 babies with polydactyl situation. They have 6 fingers, this kind of exotic, strange, Night of the Living Dead kind of things happening there. There's an X-ray picture, I think, on their website of a hand with 6 digits. Have you heard about that?
Yes, and E&E News is a great source. I check it a couple times a day. We've seen that, and we've also seen the thyroid cancers. The deformities, the stillbirths, and the increased morbidity is not being reported by the Japanese. They used to publish a report every year that had a prefecture by prefecture breakdown. A prefecture is like a state, and Fukushima Prefecture is about as big as Connecticut. So the prefecture by prefecture breakdown of deformities and stillbirths and things like that. Well, they stopped publishing that report. They did say that in 2011 there was an increase in stillbirths and deformities, but they're not providing scientists with the prefecture by prefecture breakdown. That's bad news for science, and clearly, they would rather have the Olympics and be honest with their own people about the health effects they're facing. Now,
just excuse my ignorance, but the Olympics, they're coming up in Tokyo again soon. Is that what's going on?
Well, the Abe administration just won the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo.
Yes.
So it's 7 years out, and we've had people say, I'm a runner, should I go? And my reaction is, think about the people that are living there for the next 7 years. You're going to be there for 2 weeks, and these people are there for 7 years. So in a public relations stunt, they really wanted to take people's minds off of the condition of the reactors.
Yes.
the Prime Minister Abe said to the Japanese that there's no problems at Fukushima, and it was just a bold-faced lie. He needed to get the Olympics, and he succeeded in getting the Olympics. But now he's got a $500 billion problem up at Daiichi, and he wants to take everybody's mind off it by having them march runners through the streets of Tokyo.
I suppose, without creating stereotypes, there's a degree of face saving going on here. We know that the Japanese are very conscious of that, and they probably find it difficult to admit their mistakes. Is that part of it?
Yes, I saw that. I was over there twice since the accident, and there are very conscientious scientists, and especially women, who have said, "Forget face saving. It's about the next generation." But men, and especially men in government, are driving this train, and they really do want to ignore the health consequences that are occurring up there.
Popular fast food chain Yoshinoya to grow food 60 miles from Fukushima. A Japanese fast food chain has announced plans to grow rice and vegetables on a farm 60 miles from the crippled Fukushima power plant, site of the world's worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl in '86. Yoshinoya Holdings, which sells gyudon, a stewed beef over rice, has formed a joint venture with local farmers to grow onions, cabbage, and rice for use in outlets across the country. About 160,000 people nearest the plant were ordered to move out, and the government established a 12-mile compulsory evacuation zone after the earthquake and tsunami in March 2011 caused reactor meltdowns and contaminated water, vegetables, and air. The crops will be grown in Shirakawa, to the southwest of the plant. The company said, Yoshinoya said, it would ensure that the vegetables were safe. They said in a statement, quote, "We will employ local people in the factory. We think this will lead to support for reconstruction." James, this seems too strange for words.
Strange isn't the word that I would use, but gyudon, James, gyudon. Yes, this is basically the Japanese McDonald's. It's beef on rice. It's a kind of standard Japanese fast food thing here. This is the kind of the biggest such chain that's all across Japan. So it's a place that I've been to before. I eat there maybe once a year. But never again, anyway. I think there's a good and a bad thing from this story that we can take away. The good is that at least they've announced this openly so that we know about it and consumers can make an informed decision never to eat there again. But I think the bad news might be that if other companies see this, of course, they will never actually make a big press release out of it. And hey, we're getting our food from Fukushima. I think the takeaway from this for the other fast food restaurants and other restaurant chains will be, hey, you can source cheap food from Fukushima, just don't tell anybody about it. That's what I worry about. That's, I think, the major concern. Another important story and a positive story that's just broken that I've put up on FukushimaUpdate.com, the ex-Japanese Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi, who is a very popular Prime Minister in his time, enjoyed over 80% approval ratings, but was staunchly pro-nuclear and part of the kind of conservative Japanese wing, because I think they're both pretty conservative. But he was staunchly pro-nuclear during his tenure as prime minister in the middle part of last decade, and he just came out in a speech in Nagoya the other day saying that he wants Japan to adopt a zero nuclear policy, and he still has quite a bit of political weight and gravitas behind him, so that might signal a shift in the political tide here. Who knows? I'm not sure Shinzo Abe is going to turn around on a dime like that and take back his pro-nuclear stance, but at any rate, it is a hopeful sign, and I think this is the most high-profile figure we've seen make a 180 on the issue so far. So it is a sign that anti-nuclear sentiment really is growing here, and it's really, again, just a question of whether the people are going to press forward on this and really get rid of the nuclear cancer from this island.
Meanwhile, here on the west coast of America, I think as the headlines show, we're bracing ourselves for another powerful wave of radiation to hit here on the west coast. So again, this Fukushima story, James, we've now essentially been talking about for 2.5 years, and we've covered it, I think, from many, many different angles, and it's probably the sort of one story that we've returned to time and time again because I think it helps shine a light on a lot of different areas. Unfortunately, for as bad as that is, I think we can kind of learn things
You
from it.
friggin' idiots! It's right there! Read the fucking thing! It's right there! Read the fucking thing!
We were told 3 partial meltdowns, don't worry about it. Now we know it was 100% core melt in all 3 reactors.
Japan is, by orders of magnitude, many times worse than Chernobyl. Never in my life did I think that 6 nuclear reactors would be at risk.
Well, TEPCO is like the little Dutch boy. All of a sudden we have cracks in the dike, you put a finger here, you put a finger there, and all of a sudden new leaks start to occur, and they're overwhelmed. Literally making it up as they go along. We're in totally uncharted territories. You get any nuclear engineering book, look at the last chapter, and this scenario is not contained in the last chapter of any nuclear engineering textbook on the planet Earth. So they're making it up as they go along, and we are the guinea pigs for this science experiment that's taking place.
All radiation is damaging. It's cumulative. Each dose you get adds to your risk of getting cancer.
Within days of the Fukushima Daiichi catastrophe beginning, we were getting fallout coming down in rain in the United States, not in insignificant quantities. And also, of course, the seafood, not only does the ocean's currents bring the radioactivity this way, but also the sea life itself, the bluefin tuna, migrated from Japan to North America and carried the radioactive cesium in its flesh over here.
Wow, not a good time to be eating tuna.
The food chain remains contaminated for hundreds or thousands of years, and we'll start seeing lung cancer and leukemia, I think 2 to 5 years from now. And then solid cancers will start appearing 15 to 60, 70 years later. So the ace up the sleeve of the nuclear industry is the incubation time for cancer. It takes a long time for cancers to develop once you have inhaled or been exposed to these radioactive elements. And no cancer identifies its origin. And so there is already a level of cancer in society, but it's going to increase dramatically.
The problem is not really under control.
It will not be under control for, it's estimated, between 40 and 100 years from now.
There's no way to clean it up. They say 40 years, but they can't clean it up. They can't.
And the site's still unstable and vulnerable to natural disasters.
If there is another earthquake, a serious one, 6, 7, 8 or 9 magnitude, that would rattle all these 1,060 tanks. It would rattle the damaged cores, spent fuel, whose structures have already weakened. Yes. That's a potential very, very serious threat.
Approximately 300 tons of water was filtering through the site until early this month, becoming laced with radioactive materials and then seeping into the sea. Another factor is the ever-increasing amount of water accumulating inside damaged infrastructure. Once it makes its way into reactor buildings, it mixes with radioactive isotopes. For months, TEPCO workers have been pumping up 400 tons of water every day and storing it in tanks on site.
There's 1,060 tanks, stainless steel water tanks, that are holding the water which they keep pumping into the damaged reactors and the spent fuel storage pools.
From the air, the scale of the problems at Fukushima become clear. The growing mass of storage tanks now dwarfs the plant itself. More than 1 million tons of highly radioactive water is now stored here.
But the tanks have been hastily built.
They're made of steel plates, bolted together, rather than welded. Last week, workers detected a major leak in one of those tanks. About 300 tons of water escaped, releasing several quadrillion becquerels of radioactive particles.
Experts have often pointed out how vulnerable they are to damage.
The tanks, though, have been put together very quickly. There's no guarantee they'll last. Their seals are made of rubber, and the joints and bolts are corroding, and they may last not more than 5 years.
So the tank farm has grown dramatically, and it's on the hill. Of course, the problem is, because it's on the hill, the water flows down, and if there's an earthquake, all of these pipes are held together with plastic piping, not much different than what you've got on a swimming pool. So the plastic pipe will snap, and that water will just run right down that roadway directly into the ocean.
And how long the contamination has been leaking into the water?
Very likely since the explosions and the meltdown at Fukushima Daiichi in March of 2011.
Wow, that is quite a long time. Now, how much and what sort of radiation is leaking into the Pacific? I know there's all different types, so if you can explain that in a little detail.
Well, clearly what we've seen now is the movement of radioactive hydrogen, tritium, which is a mobile radioactive isotope, but clearly radioactive cesium, 134, 137, strontium-90. We're seeing a full range of radioactive contaminants now moving, which indicate that the damaged cores of these reactors, the meltdowns themselves, are now contributing to the contamination of the Pacific Ocean and groundwater that's moving at about a rate of 300 to 400 metric tons per day. So
the radiation has been leaking into the water and polluting the fish continuously for the last 2 years.
Radioactive iodine-129, its half-life is 17 million years, plus strontium, plus cesium, plus tritium, and I could go on and on and on. If it gets into the sea, the algae concentrated hundreds of times, then the crustaceans concentrated hundreds of times, then the little fish, then the big fish, then us. Because we stand on the apex of the food chain. You can't taste these radioactive elements, you can't see them, and you can't smell them. They're silent.
This graphic shows the gradual contamination of the Pacific Ocean due to leaks of radioactive water from the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan. The simulation, which was run by a German Marine Research Institute, shows the entire Pacific waters being polluted by radioactive water in just 6 years.
The fuel core of Unit 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. More than 1,500 fuel rods sit in a damaged storage pool 30 meters above ground.
Yeah, the amount of radioactivity in the rods themselves is about 14,000 times that of the Hiroshima bomb.
We are dealing with diabolical energy. E equals mc squared. It's the energy that blows up nuclear bombs. Einstein said, nuclear power's a hell of a way to boil water. They need to remove those fuel rods from the pool because if there's another earthquake, Building 4 would go down probably, and all those fuel rods would be exposed to the air and they would burn. And they would release 10 times more radiation or cesium than was released at Chernobyl. Huge amounts, and pollute much of Japan and the Northern Hemisphere. So we're in a nuclear crisis at the moment. If there's another earthquake and Building 4 collapses, which contains the cooling pool with fresh fuel, I'm going to evacuate my family from Boston. So they've put a crane on top of that building, which is shaky anyway, and they're going to lift the fuel assemblies out one by one with the crane, and it will be done manually. Normally, those rods are removed by computer control with millimetres to spare. It's a very delicate operation.
The fuel rods must be kept submerged and must not touch each other or break. Nuclear experts warn any mishaps could cause an explosion many times worse than that one here in March 2011.
Because if several rods touch each other, you could reach criticality, and the whole fuel pool could go critical, or if the rods break as they're being lifted out, large amounts of radiation would escape from the rods and the area would have to be evacuated, meaning that the area is evacuated, the continuous operation of cooling 5 spent fuel pools and 3 melted cores would stop. Need I go on?
A study just published by the United States government reports the discovery that low-dose radiation is so safe, evacuations from future nuclear disasters may be unnecessary. If another event like Fukushima occurs, the public could be allowed to live in the fallout zones, spared from the inconvenience of relocation and compensation for damages.
Right there, you friggin' idiots! It's right there! Read the fucking thing! It's right there!